The sterile scent of the courtroom clung to Amelia's clothes like a shroud, a stark contrast to the fragrant aroma of lavender and chamomile that usually filled her small cottage. It had been 3 months since the verdict. 3 months since Sophia, her ex-husband's new wife, had sat stone-faced as the judge dismissed her frivolous lawsuit. Amelia had won, but the victory felt hollow, a temporary reprieve in a war she never wanted to fight. She'd hoped that would be the end of it, that Sophia would finally leave her to rebuild her shattered life. But some people don't just want to win, they want to see you lose. And as Amelia would soon discover, for Sophia, a courtroom loss was not an end, but a beginning. The real battle was about to begin, and it wouldn't be fought with lawyers and judges, but with whispers, lies, and a single devastating phone call. The day it all began, Amelia was on her knees in her garden, her hands plunged deep into the cool, dark earth. The garden was her sanctuary, a place where she could coax life from the soil and forget, for a little while, the life that had been so brutally uprooted. It had been 2 years since the divorce from Mark, a messy, painful affair that had left her with a broken heart, a mortgage she could barely afford, and a profound sense of failure. But she was a survivor. She'd started a small business from her home, selling artisanal soaps and candles, her creations a testament to her resilience. The familiar crunch of tires on the gravel driveway broke her reverie. She looked up, shielding her eyes from the afternoon sun, and saw a sleek, black sedan pull up in front of her cottage. A man in a sharp suit stepped out, his face a mask of professional indifference. He was holding a briefcase, and Amelia's stomach clenched. Men in suits never brought good news. "Amelia Hayes?" he asked, his voice crisp and impersonal. "Yes," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He handed her a thick envelope. "You've been served." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Served for what? She hadn't done anything wrong. She was just trying to live her life, to find some semblance of peace after the storm. She tore open the envelope, her hands trembling. The legal jargon swam before her eyes, but a few words stood out, sharp and venomous. Defamation, emotional distress, damages. And then she saw the plaintiff's name. Sophia Hayes. Sophia, Mark's new wife. The woman who had, in Amelia's mind, stolen her life. Amelia had only met her a handful of times, at awkward, stilted handovers when Mark came to pick up the last of his things. Sophia was beautiful, of course, with a practiced smile and eyes that held a chilling emptiness. She had always made Amelia feel small, insignificant, a relic of a past that Mark was eager to erase. The lawsuit was a work of fiction, a twisted narrative in which Amelia was a bitter, vindictive ex-wife, hell-bent on destroying Sophia's happiness. It claimed that Amelia had been slandering Sophia to mutual friends, spreading vicious rumors and causing her severe emotional and psychological harm. It was all lies, of course. Amelia had been so careful, so determined to maintain her dignity, to not give Mark and Sophia the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. She sank back onto her heels, the legal documents clutched in her hand. The garden, her sanctuary, suddenly felt like a cage. The scent of the roses, usually a comfort, now seemed cloying, suffocating. She thought of Mark, of the man she had loved for 15 years, the man she had built a life with. How could he let this happen? How could he stand by and watch his new wife try to destroy her? The power imbalance was staggering. Sophia had Mark's wealth and influence behind her, while Amelia had only her small business and a mountain of debt. It was a classic David and Goliath story, but Amelia didn't feel like a plucky underdog. She felt like a lamb being led to the slaughter. She spent the next few days in a daze, a fog of disbelief and despair. She barely ate, barely slept. The legal documents sat on her kitchen table, a constant mocking reminder of the nightmare that had become her life. She finally called a lawyer, a woman named Sarah, who had been recommended by a friend. Sarah was sharp, compassionate, and blessedly direct. "This is a classic intimidation tactic," Sarah said after reading through the lawsuit. She's trying to bully you, to bleed you dry financially and emotionally, but her case is weak. There's no evidence, just a lot of hearsay and conjecture. We can fight this, Amelia, and we can win." Sarah's words were a lifeline, a glimmer of hope in the darkness. But even with a good lawyer on her side, the fear was a constant companion. The psychological conflict was relentless. Sophia's accusations, though baseless, had a way of seeping into her consciousness, making her question herself. Was she bitter? Was she resentful? Had she, in some unguarded moment, said something that could be twisted and used against her? The hidden motives were what truly terrified her. This wasn't just about money or reputation. This was about something deeper, something more personal. Sophia wasn't just trying to win a lawsuit. She was trying to erase Amelia, to obliterate her from Mark's past and from her own future. It was a battle for her very existence, and Amelia knew with a chilling certainty that this was only the beginning. The first pre-trial hearing was a blur of legalese and veiled hostilities. Amelia sat beside Sarah, her hands clenched in her lap, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Across the room, Sophia sat beside her own high-priced lawyer, a man with a smug smile and a predatory glint in his eyes. She was the picture of serene confidence, her posture perfect, her expression a carefully crafted mask of aggrieved innocence. Mark was there too, sitting a few feet behind her, a silent, stoic presence. He wouldn't meet Amelia's eyes. The weeks leading up to the trial were a grueling marathon of depositions and discovery. Sarah was a relentless advocate, meticulously dismantling Sophia's claims, exposing the inconsistencies and outright lies. But Sophia was a formidable opponent. She was cunning, manipulative, and a master of playing the victim. She had managed to convince a handful of their mutual acquaintances to testify on her behalf. Their stories a collection of half-truths and misremembered conversations, all twisted to paint Amelia as a jealous, unstable woman. The power imbalance was a constant suffocating weight. Sophia's legal team was a well-oiled machine, while Amelia was running on fumes, her savings dwindling with each mounting legal bill. She was forced to take out a second mortgage on her cottage, the one place she had felt safe, the one place that was truly hers. The psychological conflict was taking its toll. Amelia found it hard to sleep, her nights filled with anxious dreams. She lost weight, her once healthy appetite replaced by a constant knot of dread in her stomach. The joy she had once found in her work, in creating her soaps and candles, had been replaced by a weary sense of obligation. Her business, her lifeline, was suffering, her orders piling up, her creativity stifled by the all-consuming stress of the lawsuit. It was during one of the depositions that Amelia saw the first crack in Sophia's carefully constructed facade. Sarah was questioning one of Sophia's witnesses, a woman named Karen, who had been a friend of both Amelia and Mark. Karen was clearly uncomfortable, her answers vague and evasive. "Mrs. Sterling," Sarah said, her voice calm and measured, "you testified that my client, Ms. Hayes, told you that she wished Sophia would disappear. Can you tell me the exact context of that conversation?" Karen shifted in her seat, her eyes darting towards Sophia. I don't remember the exact context. It was a while ago." "But you remember the exact words," Sarah pressed. "Yes, she said she wished Sophia would disappear." "Did she say it in a threatening way? Did she sound angry? Upset?" She was upset, yes, but I wouldn't say she was threatening." Sarah paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Sterling, that what Ms. Hayes actually said was that she wished the whole situation, the divorce, the constant reminders of her failed marriage, would just disappear? That she wished she could just move on with her life?" Karen's face paled. She looked at Sophia again, a flicker of fear in her eyes. I might have misunderstood. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. It was the first time Amelia had seen Sophia's carefully crafted narrative begin to unravel. It was the first time she had seen a chink in her armor. That night, Amelia couldn't sleep. The image of Karen's frightened face was seared into her mind. It was clear that Sophia had coerced her, had twisted her words and used their friendship as a weapon. And if she had done it to Karen, who else had she manipulated? The next day, Amelia started making her own calls. She reached out to old friends, people she had lost touch with after the divorce, people who had known both her and Mark. It was a painful, humiliating process, dredging up the past, rehashing the details of her failed marriage. But she was no longer just a victim. She was a fighter. And then she got a break. A woman named Chloe, who had worked with Mark for years, agreed to talk to her. Chloe had always been kind to Amelia, had always treated her with a warmth and respect that was now so painfully absent in her life. "I never believed it, Amelia," Chloe said, her voice filled with a quiet sympathy. "I never believed you were the kind of person Sophia was making you out to be. She's a piece of work, that one." Chloe went on to tell Amelia about Sophia's reputation at the office. She was known for being ambitious, ruthless, and a master of office politics. She had a history of manipulating situations to her advantage, of using people and then discarding them when they were no longer useful. "She's done this before, Amelia," Chloe said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Not a lawsuit, but she's made people's lives miserable. There was a woman a few years ago, another colleague. Sophia saw her as a threat, and she systematically destroyed her reputation. The woman ended up quitting, moving to another city. It was a chilling revelation, but it was also a validation. Amelia wasn't crazy. She wasn't imagining things. Sophia was a predator, and Amelia was just her latest prey. The information Chloe gave her was a game changer. It provided a pattern of behavior, a history of malice that Sarah could use to challenge Sophia's credibility. For the first time since she had been served with those papers, Amelia felt a surge of hope. She was still scared, still overwhelmed, but she was no longer alone. She had an ally, a witness who was willing to speak the truth. The trial was still a looming, terrifying prospect, but now, at least, she had a fighting chance. She had a chink in Sophia's armor, a crack in her perfect facade, and she was determined to use it to bring the whole rotten structure crashing down. The moral complexity of the situation was not lost on her. She was not a vengeful person, but she was being pushed to her limits. And she was discovering a strength she never knew she had, a fierce, protective instinct that was rising up to defend her life, her reputation, and her sanity. The slow emotional shifts were happening. The victim was becoming a warrior. The courtroom was a crucible, a pressure cooker of tension and unspoken animosities. The air was thick with the weight of unspoken words, of lives hanging in the balance. Amelia sat at the plaintiff's table, her back ramrod straight, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She had chosen her outfit with care, a simple, elegant dress in a muted shade of blue, a stark contrast to Sophia's power suit and blood-red lipstick. She wanted to project an image of quiet dignity, of a woman who had been wronged but refused to be broken. The first few days of the trial were a blur of legal maneuvering and character assassinations. Sophia's lawyer was a master of insinuation, painting Amelia as a bitter, unstable woman, a scorned ex-wife obsessed with her former husband's new life. He called a parade of witnesses, each one adding a new layer to the carefully constructed fiction of Amelia's supposed vendetta. They spoke of hushed conversations, of misinterpreted glances, of words taken out of context. It was a masterclass in gaslighting, and Amelia could feel the jury's eyes on her, their expressions a mixture of pity and suspicion. But Sarah was a brilliant strategist. She chipped away at Sophia's case, her cross-examinations a masterclass in precision and control. She exposed the inconsistencies in the witnesses' testimonies, the gaping holes in their stories. She revealed their biases, their personal relationships with Sophia, their motivations for testifying against Amelia. One by one, Sophia's carefully chosen soldiers began to falter, their stories crumbling under the weight of Sarah's relentless questioning. The turning point came when Sarah called Chloe to the stand. Chloe was a breath of fresh air, a beacon of honesty in the stuffy, suffocating courtroom. She spoke with a quiet confidence, her voice clear and unwavering. She told the court about Sophia's reputation at work, about her history of manipulation and deceit. She described in damning detail how Sophia had systematically destroyed the career of another colleague, a woman who had dared to challenge her. Sophia's lawyer tried to discredit Chloe, to paint her as a disgruntled employee with a grudge. But Chloe was unshakable. She had documents, emails, a paper trail that backed up every one of her claims. The jury listened intently, their expressions shifting from skepticism to a dawning sense of understanding. And then, it was Sophia's turn to take the stand. She was the picture of poise and control, her voice a soft, melodic purr. She played the part of the victim to perfection, her eyes welling with tears as she described the emotional turmoil Amelia had supposedly caused her. She spoke of sleepless nights, of a constant sense of fear, of a life that had been turned upside down by Amelia's relentless campaign of harassment. But under Sarah's gentle but persistent questioning, the cracks began to appear. Sophia's carefully rehearsed answers started to sound hollow, her emotional displays a little too theatrical. Sarah brought up Chloe's testimony, the emails, the pattern of behavior. Sophia's composure began to fray, her voice taking on a sharp, defensive edge. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Hayes?" Sarah asked, her voice deceptively soft, "that you have a history of targeting women who you perceive as a threat? That you use intimidation and manipulation to get what you want?" "That's a lie," Sophia snapped, her voice a little too loud, a little too shrill. "That woman was a liar, just like this one." She pointed a trembling finger at Amelia, her mask of victimhood slipping to reveal the raw, ugly face of her rage. In that moment, the jury saw her. They saw the real Sophia, the predator, the manipulator, the woman who would stop at nothing to destroy anyone who stood in her way. The final witness was Mark. He walked to the stand with a heavy, shuffling gait, his shoulders slumped, his face a mask of weary resignation. He looked like a man who was being pulled apart at the seams, a man trapped in a war that he had no idea how to navigate. He testified that he had never heard Amelia say a single negative word about Sophia. He admitted that he had been under a great deal of pressure from his new wife, that she had been the one to insist on filing the lawsuit. He spoke of her obsessive jealousy, her constant need for reassurance, her paranoia about Amelia. It was a devastating blow to Sophia's case. Her own husband, her supposed partner, had just exposed her lies to the entire courtroom. The closing arguments were a mere formality. The verdict, when it came, was swift and unanimous, not guilty. A wave of relief washed over Amelia, so powerful that it almost brought her to her knees. She had won. She had faced the monster, and she had won. But as she looked across the courtroom at Sophia, she saw something that chilled her to the bone. There was no remorse in Sophia's eyes, no hint of defeat. There was only a cold, hard fury, a burning hatred that was more terrifying than any lawsuit. Amelia had won the battle, but she had a sickening feeling that the war was far from over. She had a feeling that Sophia was not the kind of person who accepted defeat gracefully. She was the kind of person who, when one weapon failed, simply reached for another, more deadly one. And as Sophia stormed out of the courtroom, her face a thunderous mask of rage, Amelia knew that this was not the end. It was just the beginning of a new, more terrifying chapter. The aftermath of the trial was a strange, surreal limbo. The world, which had been a chaotic whirlwind of legal battles and emotional turmoil, was suddenly still. The constant phone calls from Sarah, the endless stream of emails, the sleepless nights spent poring over legal documents, it all just stopped. Amelia was left with a profound sense of emptiness, a void where the all-consuming stress of the lawsuit had once been. She tried to slip back into her old life, to find solace in the familiar rhythms of her days. She threw herself into her work. her hands moving with a frantic energy as she mixed and poured, her small workshop once again filled with the comforting scents of lavender, chamomile and sandalwood. She took long walks in the woods behind her cottage, the rustle of the leaves and the song of the birds, a soothing balm to her frayed nerves. But the peace was fragile, a thin veneer over a deep, abiding sense of unease. The image of Sophia's face, contorted with rage, was seared into her memory. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that she was living on borrowed time. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside her window sent a jolt of fear through her. Mark had called her a few days after the trial, his voice thick with a mixture of apology and self-pity. He told her he was sorry for everything she had been through, that he had never wanted it to go this far. He painted a picture of a man trapped in a toxic marriage, a man who was just as much a victim of Sophia's manipulations as Amelia was. Amelia listened, her heart a cold, hard knot in her chest. A part of her, a small, foolish part, wanted to believe him, to feel a flicker of the old sympathy she had once had for him. But she couldn't. He had made his choice. He had stood by and watched as his new wife tried to destroy her. He was not a victim. He was a coward. "I have to go, Mark," she said, her voice flat and devoid of emotion, and she hung up. The slow emotional shifts within her were profound. The woman who had once been so desperate for Mark's approval, so willing to forgive his flaws, was gone. In her place was a woman who was learning to rely on herself, to trust her own instincts, to draw a line in the sand and say, "No more." She started taking self-defense classes, the physical exertion a welcome release for her pent-up anxiety. She installed a new security system in her cottage, the blinking red light a small, reassuring presence in the darkness. She was no longer a passive victim, waiting for the next blow to fall. She was preparing for battle. And then, one crisp autumn afternoon, it came. She was in her garden, harvesting the last of her tomatoes, when she saw a car pull up to her driveway. It wasn't a sleek black sedan this time, but a nondescript white van with the words "Child Protective Services" emblazoned on the side. Her blood ran cold. She had no children. Why would they be here? Two women got out of the van, their faces a mixture of professional concern and weary resignation. They introduced themselves as social workers and asked if they could come inside. Amelia led them into her small, sun-filled living room, her mind racing, her heart pounding a frantic tattoo against her ribs. "We've received a report," the older of the two women said, her voice gentle but firm, "of a child living in this residence who may be in danger." Amelia stared at them, her mind struggling to process their words. "A child? There are no children here. I live alone." The women exchanged a look, a flicker of something that looked like pity in their eyes. "The report was very specific," the younger woman said. "It mentioned a young boy, about 7 years old, named Leo. Leo." The name was a punch to the gut. Leo was her nephew, her sister's son. He had spent a week with her over the summer, a joyous, chaotic week filled with laughter, finger-painting, and trips to the local ice cream parlor. He was a sweet, rambunctious boy, and Amelia adored him. "Leo is my nephew," she said, her voice trembling. "He stayed with me for a week in July, but he lives with his parents. He's not here." The social workers listened, their expressions unreadable. "The report alleged that you were neglectful," the older woman continued, "that you left him alone for long periods of time, that the house was unsafe, that you were emotionally unstable." The words were like a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. She could see it all so clearly now. This was Sophia's next move. This was her revenge. She couldn't destroy Amelia in a court of law, so she was going to destroy her reputation, her family, her life. The social workers asked to look around the house. Amelia complied, her body moving on autopilot, her mind a maelstrom of fear and rage. They inspected every room, their eyes scanning for any sign of neglect, of danger, of the unstable woman described in the report. They found nothing, of course. Her home was clean, safe, filled with the warmth and love that she poured into her work, into her life. But the damage had been done. The seed of doubt had been planted. The betrayal was a bitter, metallic taste in her mouth. This wasn't just about her anymore. Sophia had crossed a line. She had brought an innocent child into her sick, twisted game. The psychological conflict was a raging battle in her mind. She wanted to scream, to rage, to hunt Sophia down and make her pay for what she had done, but she knew that was what Sophia wanted. She wanted Amelia to lose control, to become the unstable woman she had painted her to be. But Amelia was not that woman. She was a survivor, she was a fighter, and she was not going to let Sophia win. As the social workers left, their faces a mixture of confusion and apology, Amelia knew that this was a turning point. The calm was over. The storm had arrived. And this time, she was ready for it. She was not just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for Leo, for her family, for the truth. And she would not back down. The visit from Child Protective Services was a brutal, calculated strike designed to shatter Amelia's already fragile sense of security. For a few days, she was adrift in a sea of despair. The violation of her home, the insidious nature of Sophia's attack, the fact that she had used an innocent child as a pawn in her twisted game, it was almost too much to bear. But then something shifted. The fear, the despair, it began to curdle, to harden into a cold, clear rage. This was not just about her anymore. This was about justice. It was about protecting her family from a woman who clearly had no moral compass, no sense of decency. The redemption she sought was no longer just about rebuilding her own life. It was about stopping Sophia from destroying anyone else's. She called Sarah, her voice shaking but resolute. She explained what had happened, the visit from CPS, the false accusations. Sarah listened, her silence a testament to the gravity of the situation. "This is a serious escalation, Amelia," Sarah said, her voice grim. "She's playing a dangerous game, but she's also made a mistake, a big one." "What do you mean?" Amelia asked. "She's left a trail," Sarah explained. "Filing a false report with CPS is a crime. We can use this. We can go on the offensive." The words were a spark in the darkness, a flicker of hope in the suffocating gloom. For the first time, Amelia felt a sense of power, a sense of control. She was no longer just a victim, a pawn in Sophia's game. She was a player. Her first move was to call her sister, Laura. It was a difficult conversation filled with tears and apologies. Amelia felt a profound sense of guilt, as if she had somehow brought this darkness into their lives. But Laura was a rock. She was furious, of course, but her anger was directed at Sophia, not at Amelia. "This is not your fault, Amelia," Laura said, her voice fierce and protective. "That woman is a monster, and we're not going to let her get away with this." Laura and her husband, Tom, were a formidable team. They were both lawyers, sharp, intelligent, and fiercely protective of their family. They immediately started making their own inquiries, contacting the CPS office, demanding to know the source of the anonymous tip. The hidden motives of the people around her began to reveal themselves. Some, who had been on the fence during the trial, were now firmly in Amelia's camp. The CPS call was a step too far, a violation of a sacred trust. They saw Sophia for what she was, a woman who would stop at nothing to get what she wanted. But others, those who had been swayed by Sophia's charm and her carefully crafted lies, remained distant, their silence a tacit endorsement of her actions. The social lines were being drawn, the battle lines hardening. Amelia also reached out to Chloe, her star witness from the trial. Chloe was horrified but not surprised. "This is what she does, Amelia," Chloe said, her voice filled with a weary resignation. "She finds your weak spot, your vulnerability, and she exploits it." With the other woman, the one I told you about, she spread rumors that she was having an affair with a married man. It wasn't true, of course, but it was enough to destroy her reputation. Chloe offered to help in any way she could. She had stayed in touch with some of her former colleagues, people who had also been victims of Sophia's manipulations. She offered to reach out to them to see if they would be willing to come forward, to add their voices to the growing chorus of dissent. A resistance was forming, a small but determined army of women who had all been wronged by Sophia. They were a diverse group. A lawyer, a stay-at-home mom, a corporate executive, a small business owner, but they were united by a common enemy and a shared desire for justice. The psychological conflict within Amelia was still a raging battle. A part of her was terrified, overwhelmed by the forces she was up against, but another part of her was energized, empowered by the support of the women around her. She was no longer fighting this battle alone. She organized a meeting at her cottage. A war council of sorts. Laura, Chloe, and a few of the other women gathered in her cozy living room, their faces a mixture of anger and determination. They shared their stories, their experiences with Sophia, the different ways she had tried to undermine and destroy them. It was a powerful, emotional evening. There were tears, of course, but there was also laughter, a sense of camaraderie, of shared strength. They were no longer just a collection of individual victims. They were a collective, a force to be reckoned with. They started to strategize, to pool their resources, their knowledge, their skills. Laura and Tom would handle the legal side of things, building a case against Sophia for filing a false report. Chloe and the other women would gather evidence, document every instance of Sophia's harassment and manipulation. And Amelia, the reluctant leader, the woman who had just wanted to be left alone, found herself at the center of it all, a symbol of resilience, a beacon of hope for all the women Sophia had tried to silence. The moral complexity of their mission was not lost on them. They were not seeking revenge, not in the traditional sense. They were seeking justice. They were fighting to expose a predator, to protect future victims, to create a world where women like Sophia were not allowed to wield their power with impunity. The slow emotional shifts were happening all around them. Women who had once been afraid were now finding their voices. Women who had once felt isolated were now finding community. And Amelia, the woman who had lost everything, was in the process of finding something far more valuable, her purpose. The battle was far from over, but for the first time she felt like she had a real chance of winning. While Amelia and her newfound allies were busy building their case, Sophia was not idle. She was a master of manipulation, a predator who knew how to set a trap. She had been publicly humiliated, her carefully constructed image shattered by the trial, and she was not about to let that go. She started a smear campaign, a subtle but insidious assault on Amelia's character. She used social media, a network of well-connected friends, and a handful of local gossip columnists to spread her poison. The narrative was always the same. Amelia was an unstable, vindictive woman, obsessed with her ex-husband, a danger to herself and to others. The lies were a constant, low-grade hum in the background of Amelia's life, a toxic cloud that seemed to follow her wherever she went. She would catch people whispering as she walked down the street, see the pitying, judgmental looks in their eyes. Her business, which had been slowly recovering after the trial, started to suffer again. Customers cancelled their orders, their emails a mixture of polite excuses and veiled accusations. The power imbalance was once again on full display. Sophia had money, connections, and a platform. Amelia had the truth, but in the court of public opinion, the truth was often a casualty of the more sensational story. The psychological conflict was a daily battle. Amelia had to constantly remind herself of who she was, of her own worth, in the face of Sophia's relentless campaign to define her. She leaned heavily on her support system, on the women who had her back, who knew the truth and who refused to let Sophia win. And then, Sophia made her next move. She went after Amelia's business, her lifeline, the one thing she had built for herself in the aftermath of her divorce. She filed a series of anonymous complaints with the local health department, claiming that Amelia's workshop was unsanitary, that her products were unsafe, that she was using a host of banned and dangerous chemicals. A health inspector showed up at her cottage unannounced, a clipboard in his hand and a stern, skeptical look on his face. He went through her workshop with a fine-toothed comb, testing her products, swabbing her surfaces, his every move a silent accusation. Amelia was a meticulous craftswoman. Her workshop was spotless. Her ingredients were all natural, organic, and ethically sourced. She had nothing to hide, but the inspection was a violation, another intrusion into her life, another attempt to break her spirit. The inspector found nothing, of course. He gave her a clean bill of health, his report a testament to her professionalism and her commitment to quality. But once again, the damage had been done. The rumor had been planted. The seed of doubt had been sown. But Sophia wasn't done. Her next attack was even more personal, more cruel. She started to target the people around Amelia, the people who had stood by her, who had dared to defy her. She sent an anonymous email to Chloe's boss, accusing her of corporate espionage, of leaking company secrets. The accusation was baseless, of course, but it was enough to trigger an internal investigation, to cast a shadow of suspicion over Chloe's career. She started a vicious rumor about Laura, claiming that she was having an affair with a colleague. The rumor spread like wildfire, a toxic cocktail of gossip and innuendo that threatened to destroy Laura's marriage and her professional reputation. It was a classic predator's tactic. Isolate your prey, cut them off from their support system, make them feel alone and vulnerable. The moral complexity of the situation was a heavy weight on Amelia's shoulders. She felt a profound sense of guilt. These women, her friends, her allies, were being targeted because of her. They were paying the price for her fight. She called another meeting, her voice heavy with a mixture of despair and resolve. "I can't ask you to do this," she said, her voice breaking. "I can't ask you to put your lives, your careers, your families on the line for me." But the women were unshakable. They were no longer just fighting for Amelia. They were fighting for themselves. They had all been victims of Sophia's manipulations, and they were not about to back down now. "We're in this together, Amelia," Laura said, her voice fierce and unwavering. "She's not just attacking you, she's attacking all of us, and we're going to fight back." The slow emotional shifts were happening in all of them. The fear was still there, a constant, nagging presence, but it was being overshadowed by a growing sense of anger, of righteous indignation. They were not just a resistance anymore, they were a revolution. They redoubled their efforts, their determination fueled by Sophia's escalating attacks. They gathered more evidence, documented every instance of her harassment, every lie, every threat. They built a timeline, a detailed, irrefutable record of her reign of terror. And then they got a break. A former personal assistant of Sophia's, a young woman who had been fired for a minor infraction, contacted Chloe. She had seen one of the articles about the trial, had recognized the pattern of behavior, and had decided that she could no longer stay silent. She had evidence, hard evidence, emails, text messages, recordings, a treasure trove of documentation that exposed Sophia's manipulations, her lies, her utter lack of morality. It was the smoking gun they had been looking for, the final piece of the puzzle, the weapon that would finally bring the predator down. The trap had been set, but it was not Amelia who was about to walk into it. It was Sophia, and she had no idea what was coming. The final confrontation was not in a courtroom, but in the sleek, sterile boardroom of Mark's company. Amelia and her allies had decided to take the fight to Sophia's home turf, to the source of her power and influence. They had sent a carefully worded letter to the company's board of directors, outlining their case against Sophia, providing a detailed summary of the evidence they had collected. They had requested a meeting, a chance to present their findings in person. The board, a group of powerful, influential men who had a vested interest in protecting the company's reputation, had reluctantly agreed. They were skeptical, of course, but the evidence was too compelling to ignore. Amelia walked into the boardroom with her head held high, a quiet confidence radiating from her. She was not the same woman who had trembled in a courtroom just a few months ago. She was a warrior, a leader, a woman who had found her voice and her power. She was flanked by her allies, Laura, Chloe, and the other women who had been targeted by Sophia. They were a formidable force, a united front of resilience and determination. Sophia was already there, sitting at the head of the long, polished table, a smug, self-satisfied smile on her face. Mark was beside her, his expression a mixture of anxiety and confusion. He looked like a man who was about to witness a car crash in slow motion. The meeting began, and Amelia laid out their case, her voice calm and steady. She told the board about the lawsuit, the false report to CPS, the smear campaign, the attacks on her business and her friends. She presented the evidence, the emails, the text messages, the recordings. As she spoke, Sophia's composure began to crumble. Her smile faltered, her face paled, her eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape. The men on the board, who had initially been dismissive, were now listening intently, their expressions a mixture of shock and dawning horror. Chloe spoke next, her voice filled with a quiet dignity. She told the board about her own experiences with Sophia, about the colleague whose career had been destroyed, about the toxic, fearful environment that Sophia had created at the company. And then the former personal assistant, the young woman with the smoking gun, took the floor. She played a recording, a phone conversation between Sophia and one of her society friends. In the recording, Sophia could be heard laughing, boasting about how she was going to destroy Amelia, how she was going to make her life a living hell. She described in chilling detail her plan to file the false report with CPS, to use Amelia's own nephew as a weapon against her. The room was silent, the only sound the damning, undeniable evidence of Sophia's own voice. Mark looked as if he had been punched in the gut. He stared at his wife, his face a mask of disbelief and betrayal. The woman he had married, the woman he had defended, was a monster. The unmasking was complete. The predator had been exposed. The chairman of the board, a man with a reputation for being ruthless but fair, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, his voice cold and hard, "do you have anything to say for yourself?" Sophia opened her mouth, but no words came out. She looked at Mark, a desperate, pleading look in her eyes, but he wouldn't meet her gaze. He just shook his head, a single devastating gesture of repudiation. The redemption was not a sudden, dramatic event, but a slow, quiet unfolding. It was in the look of respect on the faces of the board members, in the quiet, supportive squeeze of Laura's hand, in the profound sense of peace that settled over Amelia as she walked out of that boardroom. The battle was over, and she had won. The fallout from the boardroom meeting was swift and brutal. Sophia, stripped of her power and her influence, was a pariah. The board of directors, in a desperate act of damage control, issued a public statement condemning her actions and announcing a full-scale investigation into her conduct at the company. Mark, finally seeing his wife for the monster she truly was, filed for divorce. The prenuptial agreement, which had been a source of so much contention in his divorce from Amelia, was now his saving grace. Sophia, who had married for money and power, was about to walk away with nothing. The news spread like wildfire through their social circle, a juicy piece of gossip that was too delicious to ignore. The same people who had whispered about Amelia, who had judged and condemned her, were now clucking their tongues in sympathy, their fickle allegiances shifting with the changing tides of public opinion. Amelia watched it all from a distance, a quiet observer of the life that was imploding in her rearview mirror. She felt no joy in Sophia's downfall, no sense of vindication. Only a profound sense of sadness for the woman who was so consumed by her own hatred, so lost in her own darkness, that she had tried to pull everyone else down with her. The moral complexity of her victory was not lost on her. She had not set out to destroy Sophia, only to protect herself. But in doing so, she had been forced to become a warrior, a strategist, a woman who was willing to fight fire with fire. And she was not entirely sure how she felt about that woman. Her life began to return to a semblance of normalcy, but it was a new normal, a different kind of peace. The lawsuit, the smear campaign, the constant sense of fear, they had all left their mark. She was stronger, more resilient, but she was also more guarded, more wary of the darkness that could lurk behind a beautiful smile. Her business began to thrive, her story of resilience and redemption resonating with her customers. She received a flood of orders, her small workshop once again a hive of activity. She hired an assistant, a bright, eager young woman who shared her passion for creating beautiful handcrafted things. Her relationships with her friends and family, which had been tested by the fire of Sophia's attacks, were now stronger than ever. They had faced the storm together, and they had emerged on the other side, their bonds forged in the crucible of shared adversity. One crisp, sunny afternoon, a few months after the boardroom meeting, Amelia was in her garden, her hands once again plunged into the cool, dark earth. She was planting a new rosebush, a symbol of new beginnings, of life and beauty and hope. She heard a car pull up to her driveway, and for a moment, a flicker of the old fear returned. But then she saw who it was. Mark. He got out of his car, his movements slow and hesitant. He looked older, more tired than she had ever seen him. He was no longer the confident, charismatic man she had once loved. He was a man who had been broken, a man who was paying the price for his weakness, his cowardice. He walked towards her, his eyes filled with a deep, abiding sadness. "Amelia," he said, his voice barely a whisper, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." She looked at him, at the man who had been her husband, her partner, her best friend, and she felt nothing. The anger, the hurt, the betrayal, it was all gone. All that was left was a quiet sense of peace, of closure. "I know, Mark," she said, her voice soft and gentle. "I know." He stood there for a moment as if he wanted to say more, but the words wouldn't come. He just nodded, a single, heartbreaking gesture of defeat, and then he turned and walked away. Amelia watched him go, and then she turned back to her garden, to the rich, dark earth, to the promise of new life. The reckoning was over. The redemption was complete, and for the first time in a very long time, she felt truly free. And so, Amelia's story comes to an end. A story of betrayal, of resilience, of a woman who was pushed to her limits and discovered a strength she never knew she had. It's a reminder that sometimes the greatest victories are not the ones we win in a courtroom, but the ones we win in our own hearts. It's about finding the courage to stand up for yourself, to fight for what's right, and to never let anyone extinguish your light. If you were moved by Amelia's story, if you've ever felt like you were up against a force that was bigger than you, then please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who might need to hear this message of hope and resilience. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that will touch your heart and inspire your soul. Thank you for watching.